It's my pleasure to have a conversation with Michael Lang. I grew up watching the Woodstock movie. I grew up listening to all the bands, and certainly credit you with a lot of the reasons why I ended up getting into the festival space myself. So it's always a pleasure to see you. I remember the first time we met, in upstate New York, and kind of looking at a big green field and thinking about what's possible, and not really that much has changed, has it, since you first saw that field?
Still looking at big green fields.
Let's kind of go back a little bit and talk about how you first got into music in New York, and then follow a little bit of the path that took you into becoming a promoter.
Well, I guess I first got into music with Elvis, that era, growing up in the 50s, and then into sort of the folk music scene in the village when I was in my teen years. And then I got into jazz, and then rock and roll sort of took over everybody's life. And at one point, I was going to NYU, and I realized that I'd had it with college, and so making a clever career move, I moved to Coconut Grove, Florida, and opened a head shop.
What were you studying in college?
I studied communications and psychology.
Did you ever actually go to class?
Occasionally, yeah, I did. It was in the village. It was at NYU, and I was working in the village at the time.
And before you went to Florida, what were some of the seminal artists that you were getting turned on to?
Most of the sort of world was captured by the Beatles when they came on the scene, but Bob Dylan was, very early on, sort of one of my iconic go-to guys. But before that, I grew up listening to Symphony Sid on the radio, and that was Latin music and jazz, and that's kind of what gave me the response I had when I first heard Carlos Santana's tape. Tito Puente was a Latin musician, very famous. My father had a Latin nightclub, and so I hung out with him a bit, and Oye Como Va was one of his big hits, and then that transferred into sort of falling in love with Carlos.
Did your dad let you hang out at the nightclub?
Hang out's not really the word. No.
What was it?
Well, Tito had all of his drums stored in the basement of the club, so I would get to play with him every once in a while. He'd give me a few lessons, and I'd be there very occasionally. I was just a kid.
And then you transferred from NYU to Tampa, right?
I transferred from NYU to Tampa and then back to NYU.
But you caught a bug in Florida?
I caught a bug in Coconut Grove. I'd been there sort of on different vacations, and it was an artist community, very laid back. The Gaslight Cafe was an iteration of the Gaslight Cafe in New York, and it was run by Sam Hood, who was the son's owner from the New York club. It just seemed like a great place to spend some time. And as I said, I went down there with the intention of opening a head shop, and did. And spent about 3.5 years there. And
how did you get that business off the ground?
It was pretty easy to get it off the ground. The world was kind of ready for it. And one of the local TV stations did a documentary called Marijuana in Miami, and focused pretty heavily on our shop, so it became pretty successful.
And what kind of things were you selling?
Exotic pipes and papers and music and posters and paraphernalia.
And so when you were getting your permit for the store, were you involved in that process?
Actually, I didn't get a permit the first time out.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the first shop, I couldn't find anything in the Grove, so I opened in Coral Gables. Coral Gables is about as right-wing as you can get in America. And so I lasted 3 weeks until they closed me down. And then I moved to the Grove and got a gift shop license. So I was involved in that process.
And so did police come by at all? And what was the...
Police were there regularly. Yeah.
And so if I was... and so this is what? This is about 75?
No, this is 65,
65, 66. So police officer comes in, and
They never came in as police officers. They came, and there was a motorcycle squad that was assigned to us on weekends, and they would sort of park and wait for somebody to jaywalk or something, or find something they could arrest me for. And that was their job for several months. And Wackenhut, who was the law enforcement agency that was hired by the state of Florida to deal with drugs, I guess, would send undercover guys into the shop. But, you know, they would be crew-cutted with ripped jeans and ripped T-shirts.
Why would they be sending undercovers into the shop?
Well, that was our question, too. So we used to have somebody follow them around, and every once in a while they'd plant some weed in the shop and go away, and somebody that we had following them would find the weed and give it to us, and we'd smoke it, and then they'd come back to try and bust the shop, and there was no weed there, so they couldn't bust it. It was really sort of Keystone Cops for quite a while.
And it was also kind of, you built a scene there too, right?
We did. We built a big kind of underground community. We had a newspaper called the Libertarian Watchdog, which was published out of the back of the shop.
What would like the type of headline be for the Libertarian Watchdog?
Cops try it again. And we became kind of this sort of southwestern connection of basically the underground sort of movement that was roaming around West Coast and New York.
And so were bands coming through at that point?
Bands were coming through, and people like Abby Hoffman and Paul Krasner were coming through. And Coconut Grove was a place which was home to Fred Neil. And Fred was, I don't know how many of you know Fred Neil, but he was an amazing musician, songwriter, Midnight Cowboy. And so people like David Crosby and Joni Mitchell and many other people would come down to play with Fred and hang out in the Grove. So there was a pretty constant stream of talent coming through.
So part of what I want to talk about today as we go through the different eras of music production in live event space is, funding. And so I know that in your book, and one of the great ways to hear a lot of the story is to read Michael's book on the history of Woodstock. Another great way to read about the history of Woodstock is to read the book that his partners wrote. The perspectives are a little bit different.
They didn't have much fun.
You've got Michael's book, The Road to Woodstock, and then the other one is Young Men with Unlimited Capital. So you have different perspectives, and we'll get a little bit to that later. But when you called your parents to say, can you help me out with a little money to open the head shop, what actually did you tell them that you were doing?
They kind of knew. I mean, by that point in my life, they were certainly aware of everything I was doing.
They were aware, and how did they take it?
They were pretty supportive.
Yeah?
Yeah, I must say. They were very liberal. Very early on, I think when I was 14, and I got caught with a joint, and of course I got the typical reaction of, my God, he's on drugs. I showed them a page in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was the law of our house.
The Wikipedia of the time, right?
Yeah, and where it describes marijuana as something pretty benign. So that kind of chilled them out, and they saw I wasn't sort of turning into an axe murderer. And
Being a lawyer or an advocate is pretty much an essential part of being a promoter, right?
I guess so, yes.
Not necessarily the formal training, but the ability to make a good argument with somebody and convince them.
Yeah.
It's good. You're getting a lot of practice at home early.
I was.
And so they were, when you said, did you, the way in which you thought the business would grow, what were your aspirations when you opened the head shop? What were you thinking it was going to do?
I just thought it would be a lot of fun. I wasn't really into it. I wasn't into making an industry out of it, and it was. It was a tremendous amount of fun. And it always supported me and sort of the group of friends that I had and people who worked there, and it became this kind of communal effort.
Was it profitable?
It was, yeah.
And then
not wildly profitable, but profitable.
Enough.
Yeah.
And then when did you start producing shows?
So I started doing free shows in the park. just as a service of the Head Shop South, which was the name of our place. And then sort of Monterey came along.
Wait. Let's talk about the free shows in the park.
Okay.
Who was playing? How many
Local
people
bands.
showing up?
Local bands, a couple hundred people, Coconut Grove Park. And
Permits?
Inner Key.
No permits?
No
Permits?
No nothing. It was very simple of an afternoon. And so then Monterey came along, and I thought, that's about the best thing I've ever heard of happening. And wouldn't it be great to do something like that?
And did you attend or no?
I did not attend. No.
Why not?
I didn't hear about it till after it happened. We were a little bit isolated in Coconut Grove. And so in any case, so we thought, this would be a great thing to do, and why don't we just call it Miami Pop, after Monterey Pop, which is what we wound up calling it. And my first thought was to have it on there was a tribe called the Seminoles in South Florida, one of the major tribes down there. And my first thought was to have it on their reservation because, first of all, you could smoke pot legally, and we were all into smoking pot. And so we spent some time talking with the chiefs, and couldn't really sort of come together on how and when and where to do it. So you talk about sort of funding.
It cuts both ways, right, negotiating with reservations, because you can have a deal and you can do some things that you can't get away with necessarily on federal or U.S. soil.
Yeah.
But then when you try to enforce the contract later, you also
We're
run
also
into a
not on
separate
US
set
soil,
of difficulties,
yeah,
right?
I'm sure that's true. But in any case, my friend Rico O'Barry, his original name was Rico Feldman, was the guy who trained the flipper dolphins. And he was an actor for Ivan Tours, and he was also a dolphin trainer and trained the killer whales. And Rick and I were best friends, and so we decided together to go ahead and try and produce the Miami Pop Festival. And we didn't have a lot of money. I think Rick put in $10,000 and I had $10,000, and this drummer that we knew named Jimmy McBaron put in some money, and we were still short. And there was a guy named Marshall Brevitz who ran a club called The Image. And The Image was sort of the major rock club in really the South. And every major band that was on tour in those days played his club. And he had some funny partners with, squash noses. And so Marshall's contribution to the funding was only good for 6 weeks. His partners were, we want our money back in 6 weeks or we're going to kill you. So that was our mandate, and so we agreed.
Was there any particular business they were in, or?
They were in many businesses. In fact, I did some work for one of them who owned a big sort of dance club up in North Miami, and I did a lighting, psychedelic lighting job for him. So he took a liking to me, and when I went to court for, other license, improprieties, he had said to me, "Don't worry, it's all taken care of." And as it turned out, I walked out victorious the day after the trial. So they were pretty well connected. But in any case, so we went about, putting the Miami Pop Festival together, and it came together kind of nicely in terms of booking. Hendrix became our closing act, our headliner.
And what was the venue?
It was the Gulfstream Park. It was a racetrack in North Miami.
And how was the conversation when you walked up and talked to the venue owner?
They were pretty receptive. It was downtime for
They
the
were
track.
receptive to what?
They were receptive to a little concert taking place in their racetrack. And we sort of described the kind of music. They knew it was contemporary music and underground music. But they, their track was dead during the off season, and so they agreed.
And what did contemporary and underground music mean at that point in time, right? Because for me, coming from the world of electronic music, I could say those same words with a straight face.
Well, our bookings were with Mothers of Invention and Blue Cheer and The Crazy World of Arthur Brown and John Lee Hooker.
And did the people at the venue understand who those acts were?
No, I had no idea who any of them were.
And did they have any input on what would happen at the festival, or were
No.
you just simply said, I want to rent the venue,
That was it.
and please get out of my way?
That was it. Totally. Totally.
And tell us about the show.
Well, you know, there was that summer there was an amazingly bad drought that spring in South Florida. Hadn't rained for 40 days, and they didn't figure it was going to rain for another 40. And consequently, we didn't bother to cover the stages. Turned out to be a bad idea. We also didn't get rain insurance, which turned out to be a bad idea.
It only gets bad when it rains,
yeah,
right?
well,
I mean,
that's-
otherwise there's never any justification for that insurance.
Well, that's where the story goes. Saturday was amazing. You know, we had, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 people, and the shows went great, even though Hendrix missed his ride back from the airport, and we had to send a helicopter for him. But that became a dramatic moment, too, when he sort of landed behind the stage.
Early private air travel for artists.
Yeah, and he was pretty much flying because somebody had given them STP at the airport. And so when they got off the helicopter, they were hovering above the ground and played that way through the set. But they did an amazing show in any case. And so Saturday went great. We had this huge...
So for those of us who never got to see Hendrix play, was it as incredible? You know,
It's a
does
revelation,
he
seeing him
still
play.
stand out in all of the shows you've seen as?
Yeah, there's
as
still nobody like him. I mean, there's, you know, he was just this amazing artistic phenomenon.
and were you interacting with him directly?
Yeah,
And how was he as a guy?
I mean, he was pretty much out here,
it
but
was a little freaky.
the three of them were. In fact, afterwards, Noel told me they were communicating through the air, you know, as having both levitated at the same time. So.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
And then the second day of the show?
The second day, the skies opened up.
And clearly you had like an evacuation plan or a rain plan, right?
No, we didn't have a rain plan because it wasn't going to rain.
Plan was to have fun.
And it rained and rained and rained and rained. They seeded the clouds the night before over the Everglades and broke the drought, you know, on us. So the only thing we could do, I mean, the crowd was getting kind of unruly, and John Lee Hooker really just sort of saved our day by just playing and explaining to everybody that, you know, what can you do? It's raining. And so we ended the show around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and, you know, returned the money. And I'm sure we've all had those things happen where shows get rained out.
So,
It's harder without a cover
did
on
you
the
do any
stage.
pre-sale tickets for that?
We did. We did. We didn't have a long pre-sale, obviously, you know, 6 weeks to do the
And
entire
what did
thing.
that look like? Were you just selling them out of your shop? Seems like a good place to
We're
make.
selling out of my shop and other shops around town.
And then everything else was walk-up.
Yeah.
All cash, right?
Yeah.
Where'd the cash go?
That's another good question. So, so the head of our security was a guy named John Eck. John Eck was famous for having invented the Eck knife for the Marines. And the Eck knife was a knife that when you sort of stuck it in someone, you were able to break it off so that they would sort of die slowly while the knife sort of moved around their body. That was who John Eck was. And
Well, it's definitely the type of guy you want running
Oh, yeah.
security, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
can't
So-
trust people.
You know, you want somebody who's tough and, you know, silent type. And so we wound up in the office on Sunday morning with the cash when the Brinks guy, who was assigned to bring our cash to the bank, arrived. And John walked into the office at the same time, and the Brinks guy was, you know, about to sort of leave with the cash, and John says, "You're not going anywhere." And he was worried about him getting paid. And so there was this, you know, sort of gunfight at the OK Corral about to happen right there in the office. And it started getting pretty heated, and the crowd was getting kind of uptight, and, you know, there was no music on. And I had to get John Lee Hooker on, so I grabbed $750, which was the balance of what he was owed. And I said to the two guys, "You just, you know, keep your hands in your pockets. I'll be back." Paid John. He got on stage and did his thing. And by the time I got back, the guy from the Brinks truck had won the argument. And so the money went back to the bank. And
And then you issued refunds?
we did, yeah.
Do you remember how much tickets cost?
I think $5.
So it was like a $2 refund on a $5 ticket or
yeah.
something?
Yeah.
So was the show profitable?
No.
So you thought you'd do it again.
Yeah. And again, we didn't really cover the stage very well.
And what gave you the sort of, you talk about Monterey, but you had basically gone from doing free shows in the park to let's do a festival. And what sort of, you were just like, oh, we'll figure it out as we go through it in terms of putting the show on, or were you working with people who had worked at Monterey?
No, we did it sort of, we'll figure it out, along the way. I mean, for staging, we used flatbeds, 2 flatbed trailers set side by side, and we did 3 of them in a row so it could do a fast changeover for the talent.
And how did the police respond to the show?
The police were fine. The police thought everybody was very chilled out. I mean, the kids were great. There was no hassles with anybody. It just went really well. There was a lot of press about that, actually, which was bode well for future concerts.
And then?
And then
And then you had this bright idea.
Yeah. It actually evolved. I mean, Woodstock, the idea for Woodstock evolved over time, over the next year, I guess. It started out with Monterey, as we said, and from Miami that year, I moved to Woodstock, New York. And in Woodstock that summer, I mean, aside from the fact that there were, bands from everywhere in town by then, there were sound outs, these kind of outdoor concert festival kinds of things, which were overnight, at a local woman's farm. This woman, Pam, had a 12-acre farm. And there was a little 6-inch above the ground stage, and talent was local. And you'd get 200 or 300 people spending the night. And the local talent, there was Richie Havens and Van Morrison and the Blues Magoos, and just great, great music. And you'd be out there under the stars, nobody hassling you. There weren't any cops around. People were smoking dope if they wanted to. And it just seemed like the perfect way to hear music to me. And then I met Artie Kornfeld, who was vice president of A&R at Capitol Records. And Artie turned out to be someone who was from my old neighborhood. I was managing a band and went to Capitol to get them a deal. And so Artie and I became friends, and we kicked ideas around at night. And one of the ideas was to do an extended concert series up in the Woodstock area. And that sort of morphed into, times are getting weird out there. Maybe this is a good time to sort of bring everybody together. And I guess, the best way I can describe what motivated Woodstock was give peace a chance. It was, a time in America where the Flower Power movement was dying quickly on the vine. A lot of the political groups were getting violent, and political groups around the world were getting violent. We had the assassination of Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and it was a pretty dark time. And so we thought, before we lose it all, let's see if there's really a way to take it out of, sort of the context of your everyday life, and see if, as a culture or as a counterculture, we could actually make this work. And so that's kind of the track Artie and I went down.
And then, so which came first, finding a location or trying to figure out how to pay for it?
Actually, the location came first. I found a site in Saugerties, which is where we had the 25th anniversary. And we spoke to a real estate guy, and $5,000 was the number, and we were in heaven. We were off and running. That lasted until the second meeting.
The second meeting with the town?
No, with the owner. But in any case, we thought we had something, so we went out to do the funding. And
then let's walk us through that pitch meeting.
So my lawyer, this guy Miles Laurie, knew of these 2 guys who were building a recording studio in Manhattan, and it was called Media Sound, and thought, because we also had this idea to build a recording studio in Woodstock, that it would be a good idea for us to meet. So we met, and John and Joel had a company called Champion, I think, something like that. I remember there was a kind of one of those moving letter boxes, it said Champion Entertainment or something like that. Or not Entertainment, but it's Champion something. In any case, Artie and I went to visit them in their apartment, and pretty much Artie did all the talking.
And what were your first impressions? Because they were kind of more from the, I guess to use the parlance of the times, kind of square, right?
They were kind of square. They were two sort of yuppie types looking for business opportunities. And, since Artie was the straighter of the two of us, the more presentable, he did most of the talking.
And how much money were you looking for? Because initially you were not looking for investment for the festival, and it kind of turned around,
Not
right?
from them. Originally from them, we were looking for investment for the studio. And so we had this long talk about the studio. They didn't seem to be really very interested. And then we mentioned the festival on the way out the door. And eventually what it came down to was they invested.
But your description to them must have been a little bit different, right? It wasn't just 3 days apiece. It wasn't give peace a chance.
No,
What was
it
so
wasn't.
so? What was your pitch to them?
My pitch to them was 50,000 people at $5 a head for 2 days. That was my pitch to them.
But didn't. So how did you explain the loss in Miami?
Rain. We'll get rain insurance this time. It's that simple. So, in any case, we went away, thinking these guys don't want to invest in the studio, and we were talking to Larry Bell from Bell Records at the time about investing in the festival, and he was pretty interested. And so we called them back a couple of days later and said, thanks guys, but we're going to go with someone else, and they were really upset, and they said, well, why don't you sort of come back and we'll reconsider this, and so we did, because we kind of liked the idea of two, yuppie guys as partners, and we made a deal for the festival and the studio, and they put up $250,000 for the studio and $250,000 for the festival.
And what was your anticipated budget for the festival?
My off-the-cuff budget initially was $500,000.
So you figured 250 investment, 250 in ticket sales,
Yeah.
and we'll make 750.
Yeah.
Or whatever the.
Well, it was just that'll get us started, and we'll see where it goes.
We'll figure it out as we get down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
And where were these guys? I think there's kind of a funny story about where the money came from, right?
Well, it came from John's trust fund.
Right, and part of the restriction of a trust fund, right, is you have to be a certain age before you can get access to the money.
But he had gotten his first two, I think, installments of $1 million each.
And then wasn't there also a part where somebody got a loan against the future of the trust fund?
No, that happened at the end.
Okay, we'll get to that. And so, once you and you got into it, and now which venue are you planning the festival in?
So
Socrates is Winston Farm is off the table.
No, actually, at that point, Winston Farm was very much on the table. And
did you take the investors there and say this is the field where the magic will happen?
No, but we told them we had a location that looked good.
It's one of the most beautiful sites on the East Coast. If you haven't been, it's incredible.
It's really lovely, and it's where we had the 25th anniversary. And so we made our deal, and then we set up a meeting for John and Joel, being the more sort of, likable types for the owner of the farm, who was a guy named Schaller. He had a company called Schaller and Weber Meats, and it was pretty conservative. So we sent John and Joel up to meet with him. They never got to meet him. They met his attorney, and his attorney, after the first 5 minutes said, Mr. Schaller's not really interested in this.
I've heard that many times myself.
Yeah.
Once from the Schaller family.
That's right. We did the '94 event with his sons, who were much more interested in rock and roll. In any case, so that site went away, and we set about trying to find, in the same upstate area, another location.
And at this point, had you started booking bands?
We're about to start booking bands. We haven't yet.
So
What I was doing was setting up a separate office from John and Joel,
Why is that?
just so I'd have space to actually figure out how to do this. And
In John and Joel's book, it's it's because Michael was smoking a lot of weed and partying, and there were beautiful women coming in and out.
not true at all.
All lies, right?
All lies. And I started to put together, the team of people to do this. And the music business was a business then. It wasn't an industry, and there weren't that many experienced, skilled people. Certainly not to do something on this scale. Originally, we had when we talked to John and Joe, we were talking about 50,000, and then that's soon up to the number to 200,000. And
So let's go through basic promoter math, because people tend to do it a little bit differently.
yeah,
200,000 per day or 200,000 total?
200,000 per day.
So,
Because we were not contemplating very much, single day sales.
So you went from doing 10,000 in Miami, right? 40,000 in Miami Pop, 40,000 per day.
One day, second day.
40,000 for a day and a little bit.
Yeah.
And then to 200,000
Yeah.
a day.
And 200,000 was just sort of a projection. We were in a
But by modern times, the way that that would be calculated now is every promoter would claim 600,000, right? So we've all changed the math so that we can get more sponsorship, or I don't know what it is, but
that's true.
so we're really talking about 600,000 people over the course of 3 days. They just all get counted 3 times because it sounds bigger, right?
Yeah. And our thinking was, we're going to promote this nationally, but even in within the sort of tri-state area, there are about 50 million people, so. Why not prepare for 200,000? Who knows? It was just a number that we pulled out of the sky. And so I went about putting together a team. And, most of the team I stole from Bill Graham, frankly, because Bill had sort of the premier music operation of its day. And a lot of the people that worked with Bill didn't last very long because Bill was not that easy to work with. So there were a number of them available, and then a few that left Bill to come and work on it. So we did that, and all the while looking for a location. And we were unable to find a location.
And when you were looking for locations, how many people were you telling them were going to come?
50,000. Yeah. Over 3 days. I didn't want to scare anybody. It's just, we knew it would be okay. So we went about trying to find a location and couldn't really find one. And one day, John and Joel were riding upstate, looking for I don't know what, but they came across this sign on Route 17 which said Mills Industrial Site, 200 acres for rent. And so they went up and met Mr. Mills and made a tentative deal for I think $10,000. Left him a deposit, and came back and grabbed me and I grabbed my guys and we went up to take a look, and it was heartbreaking because it was an industrial site that had been sort of bulldozed and dredged and buzzards were circling. But we talked about it for a while. Mel Lawrence was my operations site. He worked at the Mount Tamalpais Festival and then at Monterey and had done the second Miami Pop with a guy named Tom Rounds, and was pretty competent in doing sort of artistic work around a festival site. And so we decided that we could actually make it work if we had to. And so we were getting late, and it was in March, and we still didn't have a site. And I had just started booking. And so we said...
Everybody got that right, started booking, and there was no venue.
Yeah. Well, there was a theoretical venue. And so we made a deal. There were no legal restrictions. There was no town ordinance that prevented it from happening. John and Joe went up...
Because they hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah. Thank you. John and Joe went up before the town board and explained that it was a musical event, folk music, and sort of light jazz. And
Classical music,
and
if you will.
And they said it sounded charming. And so we made the deal and started to move our crews in. Now, once our crews started to move up, they were not the charming types. They were long-haired freaks, and the townspeople started to get worried. And our town meetings, proceeded steadily downhill from there for the next couple of months. And we had some pretty dramatic moments, presenting to them. And at one point, there was a group called the Concerned Citizens Committee. It's very reminiscent of
It's always
the
a bad
CCC, who were very much against us being there and started letting us know that by shooting at our barn. And so at one point it got so bad that the town decided to pass legislation that would prevent us from actually meeting their terms and doing the event. And so we fought it for a while, and in July, there was a big town meeting where they passed the local ordinance number 1. And that was July 15th. And essentially, it meant that we were not going to
July 15th, and just for anybody who doesn't know the dates, you're only about a month and a half away, right, at that point?
Yeah, we're a month away. We're a month away. And we could have fought them, and we would have won, but we would have won sometime the next winter. So we had booked all the talent, just about all the talent. We'd spent tons of money on site prep and promotion and everything, and we'd sold a shitload of tickets. And so I just got, instead of, weeping over it, I just put everybody on the phones to local press and local papers just to say that we, get the story out. We'd lost our site. Anybody that has any information, please, get in touch. And then went to the city to sit with John and Joel and Artie and the lawyers. And during that meeting, I got a phone call from my assistant who said there's a guy in White Lake who said he has a permit for a festival, a site for a festival, and wants you.
Hooray!
Hooray! Exactly. So I jumped in the car and went up and met Mel and a couple of the other guys at this motel called the El Monaco, which is where this guy resided. And the El Monaco, was like a nightmare hotel. It was, it was literally a nightmare. It was the pool was drenched with black tar, and half the doors were off the rooms, but there was this guy, Elliot Tiber, who was very chipper and very cheerful, and welcomed us and said, come on, I'll show you the site. And so he takes us down back in the motel into a big field, and Mel is sort of walking in front of the rest of us, and all of a sudden Mel disappears. And where did Mel go? Turns out it's a swamp, and Mel is now. and so Elliot's reaction is, we can clear all this with bulldozers. It's not going to be a problem. So Mel got up and went for Elliot's throat, and we pulled him off and walked back up to the office. And on the way to Elliot's motel, we saw some beautiful farmland, really gorgeous farmland. And so I said, is there anybody around who knows the real estate who could show us around? And he got this local realtor to come and pick us up. I forget the guy's name. And we went sort of riding through the neighborhoods and through the farmland. And we went down this one road, Herd Road, and came up over a hill, and there was this bowl, which was sort of the dream bowl. It was just the perfect place. And who owns this? And it's a guy named Max Yasgur. And so let's go to Max's house. And so we drive over to Max's, and I tell him what we have in mind, and he comes back with us to the field. And it turned out that Max he was sort of the biggest dairy farm in the area, and the town's sort of major businessman. And he was having a rough year and needed to buy a lot of hay for his cows that year. And so it was opportune for him. So Max and I walked out into the field, and he said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, what have you got? I'll take this field. What else do you have? And he had about 600 acres.
And by that point, what were you telling him? Because you clearly had sold a number of tickets, and you started to get an indication of the size of what to expect. So
50,000.
50,000. We're still at 50,000 total, right? Total over 3 days.
Yeah, 50,000. Listen, it worked so far. So Max, I don't know if you guys had local butchers like we did, but they used to work on brown paper bags when they added up your bill, and they'd have a lead pencil, and they'd lick the lead pencil and start writing numbers, and that's what Max did. He took out his lead pencil and licked it and started writing numbers, and it was, it's going to cost me so much per acre to lose the crop, so much to reseed, so much to do this, so much to do that. And it came up to about $50,000, I think, $55,000, which was a huge amount of money in those days. And I said, fine, we have a deal. And then brought John and Joel.
But there was an insurance policy too, right? Didn't he want $75,000 for a deposit against damages?
He did. But
we were going to get that back.
Not only were we going to get it back, we never paid it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We worked it out, so we didn't have to pay that. So I rented everything that Max had, and the next day, the truck started rolling in, and it was really a monumental effort to get everything done, especially from the local services, from the guys from the phone company and the power company. They really worked 24 hours a day for us, bringing power out to the site and telephone service. And we had this resident genius, Chris Langhart, who did all of our engineering and laid out the water systems. And there was luckily a beautiful lake behind where the stage was going to be, and we used that as our water source and did purification and really constructed the city in a month. Not quite constructed. We didn't actually get the gates up, but everything else was constructed.
And as you got closer to the show, right, one of the things that I think anybody that's done a big event, you get closer and certain things keep you up at night, and you start thinking about, well, what ifs? As you were getting closer to the show, now that you're in the build process, and you're seeing ticket sales go and it's taking traction, what are you concerned about?
Everything. I mean, we had at that point sold 186,000 tickets, so we knew we were going to get a crowd that was well in excess of 50,000, and well in excess of 186,000, and so it was really get the essentials done and worry about the rest later.
So the logistics got a lot more complicated.
They did. And we had planned Woodstock.
And there was no real template either.
No, the template was in my head basically, but it was planned to be something that was sort of a gathering of the tribes where everybody who wanted to be a part of it could be a part of it. If you didn't have money, there was free campgrounds, free stages, free kitchens. It was just something that was going to be this community of the counterculture coming together to celebrate all of the arts. And Woodstock was a music and arts festival, and the arts were an important part of it.
Now, you're worried about everything, but you're kind of enjoying it, right?
Yeah.
The process is exciting.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
How are your partners?
Nervous. They're very nervous. They don't really have a clue what's going on, frankly, other than the fact that we're, days away and things are not completed, and so nervous, in fact, that Joel forgot to put the ticket booths in place. One of my partners. They were kind of stuck anyway, but nervous because we had this month to work. 23 days of that month were raining, so roads had to be put in and then re-put in and then re-put in several times because they'd sink, and there was just a lot of that kind of pressure.
Right, you just thought originally you were going to book some bands, put up a couple of stages, and have a good time, right? Yeah. Now you're engineering roads.
Now we're engineering roads, and we're engineering, how the honeypot's going to get to clean out the portisans and
toilets
and
fencing,
food in,
the glamorous life.
Yeah, it gets down to those essentials, and that's really what it's all about. How do you keep a water system going? Max wouldn't let us bury any of the pipes, so it was above ground piping, plastic piping, if you get a break in one part of the site, pressure goes down, and then it goes down everywhere. And Chris had devised some system to find out where the breaks would be, and that worked pretty well. But in any case, it's really to the credit of the people that worked on Woodstock, the teams that we put together, that they were able to sort of stretch and make do and create, new ways to do things and get through the weekend, and we did.
Let's fast forward a little bit, because we've got not enough time to cover the amazing 3 days and subsequent years. So let's jump to some of the musical highlights for you. We'll fast forward past some of the tensions that lead into the actual show and getting into it. Let's talk about some of the musical moments that still linger with you, both amazing highlights and things where perhaps you were not so happy.
There were many highlights. The first was Richie Havens, who was the first act to play, who, he was used to coffee houses and relating to people in that kind of one-to-one way, and he was the perfect opening act. He just set a great tone for everything, and so great that every time he tried to come off stage, I'd push him back on stage because he was doing so well and because nobody else was ready to play. The roads got clogged, the equipment was late, and so we had to stretch.
And there's a lot of people there now, right?
There's probably 350 to 400,000 by Friday. We had 80,000 on Tuesday.
And as you were, there's this sort of classic shot of you on a motorcycle running around the site. Once the doors were open, as it were you still running around, or did you kind of take up office at the stage and stay there?
Yeah, I took up office at the stage, but I would go out, and go around the site once or twice a day, just to sort of, because it's really the only way you could really find out what was going on.
And as you saw the numbers sort of skyrocketing, you had a sense of what 40,000 people looked like from Miami.
Yeah.
You get a sense for what double that looks like. At what point were you like, oh wow, there's a lot more people than we thought?
Well, Thursday, by the time Thursday rolled around, we were probably at our 186,000. And when we woke up Friday morning, it was, as far as the eye could see. It was just, and I guess it peaked on Saturday. But those were just sort of added to the periphery. It was just, this sea of people.
And other than Richie Havens, talk
so
about
Richie,
a little bit.
Joe Cocker was mind-boggling. Crosby, Stills and Nash. There was just so many great moments. All of the bands were terrific, I thought. The highlights, I guess, were Sly and the Family Stone, who were just beyond belief and took the whole entire audience to church. There was this call and response that was just of 500,000 people, and the energy was just amazing. That was probably the musical highlight for me, and until of course Hendrix finished it Monday morning at 10 o'clock.
And for those of us who have only experienced it through the movie, how would you say, what are the things that we get to miss, that were, our perspective through the TV and through the film that was captured? What were some of the elements of being there that really stick with you?
Well, the movie was really a good rendition of what happened that weekend. But what you miss is this sort of feeling in the air of this sort of moment out of time.
Somebody said smell.
Smell
I heard.
Too. Smell was on the way out.
Marijuana's legal now. We can make that happen.
It wasn't just marijuana. But there was just this sense of something, happening that was out of time and out of place and so special, because it took everybody. It just, there weren't people who were left out of this. It just took everybody and created this community and this sense of camaraderie and love and brotherhood and sisterhood, and it was life-changing for everybody that was there. And I think, you can't really get that from a movie, but that was really the special sauce of Woodstock.
So just so everybody knows, I asked Lori, and she gave us an extra 10 minutes. So we're going to keep going a little bit past 5. I thought she said 10.
She said people are going to want to go and drink, including you guys.
Perfect. We'll see what happens. 10 people. And then clearly there was there was a massive cleanup job afterwards on a lot of levels. When
We
did
got
you?
sued for people's cows not giving milk for weeks.
Who was, say, the first person who you had said there are going to be 50,000 people here, and then you had to come back and look at them and go, oops?
There was no oops at that point. Everybody had sort of come to grips with it and embraced it, really. Even the town, you think this town of, 3,000 or 4,000 people, and 500,000 people descend on it. That's pretty frightening. And they just, they adopted it. They made it their own. They were so impressed with the vibe the kids had and the way everybody was, they were really polite and really kind. And so the people in the town just sort of embraced the whole thing and became part of it.
And so during the event, there was a real spirit of camaraderie. Was that extended all the way to the police and the town councils and all the people who were?
Yeah, it was. As the event was starting and taking place, the police, we had to deal with the police in terms of our traffic plans. And the guy who was in charge of that barracks, state police barracks, went off the reservation and changed everything and screwed everything up. And so consequently, 40-mile parking lot. But
And one of the pieces of the aftermath of the show was that New York State passed a law, which is the Part 18 permit, which to this day is still there, which is the strictest massive event permitting process in any part of the United States. Thank you, Michael.
they basically
How fast did that happen?
Made it impossible to ever happen again.
How fast did that happen?
In the next year.
There's so much that we're not going to cover today, and I think what I want to do is one, touch on the museum, because that's a place where people can go and see some of the history. Do you want to just talk a little bit about it, enough so people can?
There's a performing arts center on the site now, which is beautifully done, and a great museum about the festival and about the 60s. So if you're ever in the area, it's definitely worth a trip.
It's a great walk down all of the minutia and a lot of the music, and you touched on it, and I want to highlight it. Talk a little bit about the role of art at the festival, because that really tends to get lost.
I've always been into art, and I, designed Woodstock to be a celebration of all the counterculture arts, painting and sculpture and crafts, and so there was a lot of it planned that never happened, but a lot of it did happen. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but the children's parks that we built were beautiful and amazing sculptures that would have worked in any museum, contemporary museum that I know of. And we had, there was a lot of crafts in the woods, and a lot of the crafts were centered around, the marijuana trade, but we're very creative. And we brought some Native Americans out from Santa Fe and did an Indian art exhibition, and we brought kids out from the inner cities to display their arts. And I think that some of the things that we infused into the festival, like the art and like yoga and like social responsibility and the idea of sort of, as I say, give peace a chance, which was the theme of the festival, is something that I think we could all do well to incorporate in the things that you guys are thinking of and doing. It's a great vehicle for social change and to get people up and activated. And, you know, right now we need it more than ever. So.
Well, and speaking of right now more than ever, we're coming up on an anniversary, right?
We are. The 50th anniversary is.
And what are you thinking? It seems like the political atmosphere might be right.
Yeah, it's definitely a good time.
Get some
for
people
it.
together.
Yeah, it's definitely a good time for it, and we're investigating it.
So it's going to be like 50,000 of our friends.
Yeah, over 3 days.
I'm getting the.
There's so many drinks that we can have the conversation over wine outside.
All right, it wouldn't be fair to let at least one person can ask a question, right? And then we'll.
Yeah, I'm no one killed them.
Okay. All right, first to raise his hand right there.
What was the
Last question.
total pay? 50,000 that you thought, 500,000 was there. What did you actually collect on after?
186,000.
And tickets cost how much?
$18 for 3 days.
All right, Lori's telling us we're done. So, thanks everybody.
Thank you.